Welcome back to the channel, Adventures in Climate Change. And I've learned a lot. I've been looking at other stuff and reading about things. And then I had my first real suggestion. It was from Mr. Ellis. And Mr. Ellis, he made a good comment. And basically, it was that the true cause is ice sheet albedo. Read paper modulation of ice ages by dust and albedo, and this dust feedback works as well in the modern era as it did during the ice age. So I went searching. Of course I went searching, and this is what I found. I basically search engined it, and I found a bunch of different pages that had scientific peer-reviewed articles, and it was written by a Mr. Ellis. And I knew when I got that comment, I was like, I am going to learn something today. I know. And then, of course, I was like, wait, this guy probably made a video about it too. So here I am, and there's his notification right there. And basically, he talks about the whole thing. Let's look at the article real quick and kind of break it down in just a small abstract way. I'm assuming albedo is a refraction of light. I should have probably looked that up, but I'm pretty sure that's what it is. The primary forcing agent regulating ice age glaciation is precession. Okay. Is albedo. So the primary system regulating ice age. Albedo modulation is controlled by desertification and dust contamination of ice sheets. So what I'm gathering is that although when you have the refraction of light, well, let's read on, because I think if you have less CO2 and you have refraction of light, it's just going to leave, right? But what happens is it becomes so dry and arid and dusty places that when that happens, the wind picks up all that dust, takes it over the ice, and blankets it with dirt. Then it becomes maybe more of a frost. I'm not let's read on. So I'm thinking that's kind of where that's going with that. Desertification and dust production are caused by low CO2 concentrations. Correct. Because low CO2 would create a more arid, dry environment, I think. We present here a simple and novel proposal for the modulation rhythm of ice ages and interglacials during the late Pleistocene. While the standard Milankovitch precession theory fails to explain the long intervals between interglacials, these can, because do we really know what causes it? That's the problem. These can be accounted for by a novel forcing and feedback system involving CO2, dust, and albedo. So it's all the combination of the three is what they're saying. Is it's the CO2 in the air, the amount of CO2 in the air, which is able to keep the heat in. Then you got the dust, and the dust blanketing the ice sheets, not allowing refraction of light. Does that mean that it just also heats up the earth because it's not refracting the light back out? So it's creating this imbalance back and forth. Okay. During the glacial period and high albedo of the northern ice sheets drives down global temperatures, okay, yeah, and CO2 concentrations. Okay, so yes, so it'll dry. So during the when it's refracting light a lot of the northern ice sheets, that drives down global temperatures because it's not accepting the heat. If I'm understanding this right, it's refracting it instead, and low CO2 concentrations, which it can't keep it in, right? And it drives down the CO2 concentrations despite subsequent precessional forcing maxima. Over the following millennia, more CO2 is sequestered in the oceans, and atmospheric concentrations eventually reach a critical minima of about 200 parts per million, which combined with arid conditions, because that's what we would expect, right, causes a dieback of temperature in boreal forests and grasslands, especially at high altitude. Yes, which is going to create a bunch of die-off. It's going to create environments where you don't have like trees and certain things to stop wind. You're probably going to get more wind and whatnot. The ensuing soil erosion generates dust storms, resulting in increased dust deposition. Yes, drier areas, you got more dust just around, right? And lower albedo on the northern ice sheets. So they're saying because the dust gets kicked up into the air, it does lower the refraction of light from the snow in the polar caps. As northern hemisphere insolation increases during the Milankovitch cycle, the dust-laden ice sheets absorb considerably more insulation and undergo rapid melting, which forces the climate into an interglacial period. Okay, so that's what they're saying, forces it into an interglacial period. And that's when the end coming out of an ice age and rapid melting. The proposed mechanism is simple, robust, and comprehensive in its scope, and its key elements are well supported by empirical evidence. Okay, maybe we should. There we go. Okay. So I think I kind of figure out what's going on. Keywords. Paleo, climatology, ice age, precession, CO2, albedo, dust. I think we know kind of what most of those are. Abbreviations. There's probably going to be a lot of abbreviations. I'm not going to go through this entire article. This would take forever. And then I am going to break down the video on another segment. This is just, I'm going to go through the introduction. And I'm almost kind of skimmed through it. But since the discovery of the Ice Age cycles almost 2 centuries ago, a large amount of geological evidence has been assembled from a variety of sources, and many different hypotheses have been advanced to account for their approximate 100 KYR periodic. Let's see, is that one of the abbreviations? I don't know what KYR is. Let's move on. Maybe it explains a little bit better. Sawtooth temperature response. Okay. So the up and down response. Improved calculations of Milankovitch insolation cycles and greater precision of Antarctic ice core records demonstrate that each major deglaciation coincides with maximum summer insolation in the northern hemisphere. Okay. Demonstrate that each major deglaciation, so every time it melted, right, coincides with the maximum summer insolation in the northern hemisphere. And yet many of the other insolation maxima only trigger minor warning events. And so interglacials only occur after 4 or 5 insolation cycles. No generally accepted explanation exists for the particular intermittent climate response. See, that's the thing. And any comprehensive explanation for ice age modulation and periodicity has to be able to explain this anomaly. The answer to this conundrum can be found in a novel reanalysis of the effect of decreasing atmospheric CO2 concentrations when we have high albedo, right? Concentrations during an ice age, okay? Which during an ice age, we got a bunch of ice. So it's going to be refracting a lot of ice. Ice age CO2 reductions coincide, and it's going to reduce the CO2 with an increase in ice sheet extent and therefore an increase in global albedo. So increase in light refraction. And this should result in further cooling of the climate. But what actually is that when CO2 reaches a minimum and albedo reaches a maximum, the world rapidly warms into an interglacial. Okay, so you got a whole bunch of refraction, and if you have like very low CO2, you get rapidly warm. Okay. A similar effect can be seen at the peak of an interglacial where high CO2. Okay. Oh, right. Okay. Because because we're talking about the decrease in CO2 concentrations during an ice age. But what actually happens is when CO2 reaches a minimum and albedo reaches a maximum, the world rapidly warms into an interglacial. So that's when it goes into an interglacial. A similar effect can be seen at the peak of an interglacial, where high CO2s and low albedo result in cooling, which is what we should be seeing pretty soon, right? Or right now. This counterintuitive response of the climate system also remains unexplained. And so a hitherto unaccounted for agent must exist that is strong enough to counter and reverse the classical feedback mechanisms. There has to be something else involved other than just the refraction, just the albedo, and just the CO2, they're saying. I think this is where they bring the dust in. The answer to both of these conundrums lies in glacial dust, which was deposited upon the ice sheets towards the end of each glacial maximum. And I bet they have layers of every time it's had an ice age. And that's why the dust layers can tell us a lot, I'm guessing. The answer to both of these, blah, 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 each glacial maximum. Previous research has considered two effects of the alien dust on the glacial aeolian dust on the glacial climate. The increased albedo of the atmospheric dust cooling the climate and the mineral fertilization of marine life, reducing atmospheric CO2. So that is what is reducing atmospheric CO2, the mineral fertilization of marine life. But both of these effects would result in a cooling feedback and therefore provide no explanation for the interglacial warming that appears to result from dust deposition. In great contrast to these explanations, it is proposed here that during the glacial maximum, during the glacial maximum, CO2 depletion starves territorial plant life. That makes sense if they're running off of CO2. A vital nutrient, and causes a dieback of upland forest and savannas, resulting in widespread desertification and soil erosion, which is what they were talking about. It's creating a bunch of dust, a bunch of arid environments, just deserts. The results dust storm deposit large amounts of dust upon the ice sheets, and now we're talking about the ice sheets coming further down on the northern hemisphere, right? So we're practically in Florida right here. So that dust from the desertification doesn't have to go very far to start, affecting the albedo, the light refraction. The resulting dust storm deposits a large amount of dust upon the ice sheets and thereby reducing the albedo, allowing a much greater absorption of insulation. Yes, because we create insulation if we don't refract the light, don't refract the heat. Up to 180 watts per meter squared of increased absorption can be provided to the northern ice sheets when calculated seasonally and regionally instead of annually and globally. The dramatic increase in insulation absorption results in melting and dissipation of the northern ice sheets. Okay, and we see that it just expands and goes crazier and crazier, right? Ice ages are therefore forced by orbital cycles and Milankovitch insulation, but regulated by ice albedo and dust albedo feedbacks. I wonder because right now I know in another video we were looking at that they're just getting blanketed by the coal. Now is that, or from diesel or whatever, the remnants from what we're burning, and they said that's accepting more heat, so it's melting it quicker. Okay, yes. And while this proposal represents a reversal of conventional thinking, it does explain each and every facet of the glacial cycle and all of the many underlying mechanisms that control its periodicity. So every time it comes and goes, and temperature and how long that takes, and excursions and limitations. Orbital forcing of ice ages and interglacials, late Pleistocene climatic cycles. Okay, so this is going to get into all sorts of stuff where it's going to be beyond me. I'm going to be talking about numbers I don't really even know. But I think orbital forcing is considered the pacemaker of transitions between glacials and interglacials. Orbital forcing, high confidence, although there is still no consensus on exactly how the different physical processes influenced by insulation changes interact influence ice sheet volume. And you can see this is kiloyears, 1,000. So this is 100,000 years ago, 200,000 years ago, 300,000 before present. So this is present. Temperature deviation way down here. Okay, so 8 degrees cooler. Now, we've seen big spikes more here. So here we go, probably hitting a big spike, and then we're going to start dropping off. That's what he's saying. It will be demonstrated shortly that the primary orbital cycle controlling paleoclimate over the last 800 kiloyears is precession, because the variation in regional insolation generated by this orbital cycle are demonstrably linked to interglacial warming. Okay, so there are three main orbital cycles that influence and regulate the intensity of territorial insolation in the high altitudes, and there are obliquity, I don't know, eccentricity, and precession. Although each of these cycles has unique effect, it is the complex interplay between these orbital cycles that provides the insolation forcing for each ice age cycle. So the Earth's axial orientation, eccentricity, the elliptical. Oh, kids home from school. Just obliquity describes the angle of the Earth's axial inclination. When acting in concert, these three orbital cycles are capable of substantially varying high latitude terrestrial insolation, a cyclical oscillation known as Milankovitch cycle, after the Serbian astronomer who made the first calculations. Okay, so I think what I'm getting is the ice on the caps really affects the orbit too, like what the Earth's doing, where it's going around, and over time, it's probably gonna get to that point where it melts even faster, or that has to do with the Milankovitch cycle and how long that takes. That's been the primary forcing agent regulating ice ages since the mid-Pleistocene transition 800,000 years ago. Obliquity was dominant prior to this time. So it must also be regulated by terrestrial feedback factors when all these things are happening at once. According to the Laskar's orbital data, Milankovitch insolation strengths and periodicity have not changed significantly for millions of years. So they're saying we've kept these cycles going millions of years. So this is all I'm going to do because, man, I'm like 18 minutes into this video. But I think this is, and it keeps going down. I really appreciate Ralph sending me this. And I read a bunch of this stuff. And it keeps going. You go down this this rabbit hole of stuff that you don't even understand. While a 6% drop in albedo is insufficient to cause an intermediate warming of the northern ice sheets and global temperatures, response clearly demonstrates a limited regional warming event would increase the concentration of surface dust considerably as each year layer of ice was melted or ablated. And we can see that, right? So it is likely that a considerable thickness of the northern ice sheets would have been contaminated by these millennial dust storms. Yes. I mean, this goes into such scientific stuff. I start reading it, and there's a lot into it. And I'm sorry, Ralph, that I'm not getting to the whole thing because I'm not doing your article justice. And it does, it just gets deeper and deeper. So, and you really have to start thinking about it. So I wanted to keep it with where my brain is now with climate control. and keep it on a larger model rather than break it down into little things. But he backs it up, I mean, with a lot of facts and numbers and showing over time and whatnot. Very interesting. I really appreciate that, Mr. Ellis. And we are going to check out your channel, which I will put it in the link below. I mean, as I get followers, hopefully you do too, because you're the real expert. I'm the one adventuring through climate change. Man, fantastic. And I look forward to breaking down your video. If you guys feel it in your heart to subscribe, I appreciate that. Like the video if you liked it, dislike it if you want to, whatever. I would appreciate a comment. And thank you, Mr. Ellis, for laying down a comment for me to talk about this subject and really break it down. I think it's the most in-depth one I've had so far, and it's not a video, so hopefully you guys aren't too bored. We'll break into Ralph's video next time. We'll catch you on the next video.